Welcome to the Kino Cave, everyone, and this is a big one. So, with the release of Avengers Doomsday this December and Avengers Secret Wars the following year, I decided to do a retrospective, or Kinospective if you will, of the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, just the Infinity Saga though. I genuinely don't know if I could possibly do the Multiverse Saga at any point in my life. I've not seen like half of it just in general. I've not seen, just off the top of my head, I haven't seen the Marvels. I have seen Shang-Chi once. I haven't seen Wakanda Forever. I watched Thor Love and Thunder at like 2 o'clock in the morning, and I think I might have fallen asleep. It's just not doable for me. However, in the Infinity Saga, I've seen every single movie at least once because when I was a teenager, I was a huge Marvel fan. Big MCU fan. It got me into like other kinds of Marvel comic books and stuff. I was riding the hype wave all the way to Infinity War and then Endgame as well. So I've seen all of those movies at least once, if not twice. So I feel like they'd be a good one to do a retrospective on, especially for me. It'll be nice to revisit all of these because a lot of these movies I haven't seen in years. I tend to only rewatch like a handful of them every couple of years. So it'll be nice to go through all of them again, you know, look back to my teenage years and realize how much of a fucking idiot I was back then for having the opinions that I had. Or maybe, we'll see, maybe I'll have some striking revelations about these movies. Either way, I have no striking revelations about this movie other than just it was nice to revisit because today is the turn of Iron Man. Jon Favreau's Iron Man from 2008. This was the first MCU movie I ever watched back when it wasn't really the MCU. Yes. We were gearing up towards possibly an Avengers movie, which I didn't even know about. I got a DVD of Iron Man because I was into superheroes and all that kind of thing. And my dad just gave me the DVD and I watched it and my life was fucking changed. I loved Iron Man. I would not have been an MCU fan if it weren't for Iron Man. I don't know where I'd be without Iron Man. This movie inspired me in so many ways, and I will surely get into why throughout the course of this video that I hope will be under an hour long. God rest my soul if it's not. And watching this movie just took me back to being like 10 years old again and just watching Iron Man and just reliving a lot of that. But anyway, I will get to that because for a retrospective, I feel like you need a little bit more than a review. So I got into all the behind the scenes material that I could find on the physical releases, on YouTube, on Disney Plus, which was very disappointing. I think I'll get into that more in a future video because Disney Plus had some stuff, but nothing that wasn't on the Blu-ray and nothing that wasn't on YouTube already and things like that. I guess you don't go to Disney Plus for that kind of thing. However, I love to see all the behind the scenes stuff. We were in behind the scenes city back then. This was like post Lord of the Rings behind the scenes stuff. Blu-ray had just come out, and a big feature of that, because you had so much extra storage on this disc, is that you could see more behind the scenes content and see more of the making of all of these movies. So I was in heaven spending hours watching behind the scenes information on Iron Man. I was watching it on my break in work. I was watching it at home whenever I had any time to myself. I was getting into all of it, and I've made notes on all of it, so let's get into it. Let's talk about the making of Jon Favreau's Iron Man. So, months ahead of principal photography, this is after Jon Favreau was on board for the film, and he was getting all the pieces into place to make this. No MCU yet, none of that shit. Alright, we have our few producers, some are better than others, and we have Jon Favreau and his dream of bringing Iron Man to life. And the first thing that happened ahead of principal photography was that Stan Winston Studios were working on the practical Iron Man costumes. So, if you don't know Stan Winston Studios, their reputation precedes them. Here are a couple of the films that they have created practical effects for. They are legends in this industry. It is worth noting that this was the last project that Stan Winston himself worked on until he unfortunately passed away. And worked is, as he admits himself in the behind the scenes, worked is a bit of a loose term. He pretty much just comes in, has a look, makes sure that everybody's working to the standards that he expects from them, and then he walks away again. But he was still involved in the production, and as he said himself, he comes in, has a look, and then he gets his name in the credits. Also ahead of principal photography, the VFX artists were working out some of the flying sequences this early on as well. Jon Favreau wanted to get these kinds of things knocked out as early as possible for a few reasons. For one thing, we need it to be the best that it can be. We don't want, we don't want to do something silly like leave some of the VFX shots up to about 2 weeks before the release of the film. That'd be ridiculous. So he wanted to get it done as early as possible. He wanted to make sure that we had what we needed before jumping into principal photography, and also he wanted to show some of these shots to the cast and crew during the shooting of the film as a bit of a motivator, a morale boost, to be like, this is where we're here, this is where we're headed to. And, give everybody a bit of a confidence boost to show that we are making something special here. It was very important for Favreau, especially during these early VFX shots and throughout the entire shooting of the film, that you fly with Iron Man. And these are some of the best types of comic book movie ideas. Like, the whole reason why comic books were successful is that young kids saw themselves in these heroes. They were relatable, and they were ideals. They were something to look up to and look forward to, and inspiring you to be a better person in your life. So of course it's important to fly with Iron Man as he flies around in the air in this metal suit. And even when I was a kid, I can imagine feeling that feeling. I mean, I wish I was Iron Man at the time. I was running around my house making like pretending I had rockets on my feet and hands, and that's what it's all about, right? In Superman 78, we fly with him. In Spider-Man 2002, we swing with him, and now we get to fly with Iron Man. Quote from him, "Movies are about emotion. They're about letting the audience experience something that they can't in real life." And it's so great to see Jon Favreau's dedication this early on, seeing how he wanted to just create an emotion. He wasn't about universe setup, he wasn't about creating a franchise or making money or giving us the hero shots from the comic books that we wanted to see. He was about creating a film that could touch people in their hearts. So a big inspiration for Tony Stark's character in the film was actually Howard Hughes, and throughout the writing process and the concept process, they kept looking back to the likes of Howard Hughes, who was like this famed, aerospace engineer. And look, I don't know shit about Howard Hughes. I'd heard the name, but I didn't know anything about him until I actually watched the behind the scenes of this. So, awesome. Yeah, of course you're going to base it all on a real life guy who was more or less Tony Stark in real life, for better or worse, I guess. Some of the scenes in the Air Force hangars in the film are actually in hangars that he worked in and had a lot of his work in them. So, that's a great attention to detail. That's a great way of reminding people where these characters are coming from, not just from the comic books, but from real life inspirations as well. Also, more care and attention to detail is that Jon Favreau invited comic creators, people who've worked on Iron Man comic books, to come in and discuss the direction that they wanted to take the character in. And they were allowed to suggest things and make contributions to this character and the concept design and all that kind of thing. And that's another great thing to see. A lot of what's talked about nowadays, and it's completely fair, is that comics creators tend to get pushed out when it comes to the process of these movies. I know that there was a story from years ago where the creator of the character Winter Soldier wasn't invited to like an after party from the film that the Winter Soldier is the title character in. And he had to text Sebastian Stan to let him in. I mean, what an disrespect. Anyway, we will get to that, I guess. But it's great to see Jon Favreau consult these creators and let them contribute things to this film, because they are in charge of these characters as they were originally, and so they deserve to have input as well. Other little things that happened, especially around the time of casting, cinematographer Matthew Libatique was kind of redesigning things based on the cast, such as Tony Stark's house. The original concept designs had like these angular and sharp edged buildings, but when he saw the softness that Robert Downey Jr. brought to this role, he completely redesigned it and made it more circular and rounded to reflect the more well-rounded personality that Robert Downey Jr. brought to the character. As well, there's hours of this kind of stuff in the behind the scenes, but seeing Robert Downey Jr. be really excited about giving this character life is so great to see, considering towards the end of his tenure as Iron Man, and seemingly for his tenure as Doctor Doom, which is an insane thing to say, he tends to, take the money and just do it the way he's always done it. But in 2007 or whenever they were filming, he was worried about bringing this character to life and bringing it to life in a way that's respectful of the original character, and doing it justice and doing Jon Favreau justice by being in it. And it's so great to see him get stuck in and get excited about these things, wearing the Mark 1 armor and like running around in it and just being out of breath after half an hour, and seeing him try and wear as much of the practical suit as possible, and just rehearsing his scenes with Jeff Bridges and trying to figure out where these characters are. It's so great to see. I love to see his energy in these behind the scenes, and nothing emphasizes that more than a short clip from Jon Favreau when they were doing night shoots, which, as someone who has been working nights for the last few months, it's fucking grueling, man, to make a switch from days to nights. And Jon Favreau was worried because, nobody's had any sleep and all that, and people might start to get groggy and cranky and angry. And then Robert Downey Jr. just walks up and says, "We don't need sleep. We got talent." That's a kind of energy that I love to see from behind the scenes imagery. Speaking on working out the scenes with other actors, there's also a bunch of clips of Jeff Bridges and Robert Downey Jr. just whiling away the hours trying to figure out where these characters are and kind of making up things. Obviously, there's the famous quote from Jeff Bridges after the fact where "we had no script, man." And while he seemingly didn't like that very much, it's great to see them kind of work out where these characters are based on the chemistry between these actors, and really have them like work out how these scenes should be structured and all that kind of thing, and working with Jon Favreau as well. And there's clips of, Robert Downey Jr. doing this with Terrence Howard as well, and all that. So it's great to see. It's great to see true collaboration on set, or, just before they walk onto set and start filming. It's great to see. Also, hilarious moment in one of these behind the scenes where they're talking about how aggressive Tony and Obadiah Stane should be in a certain scene where they're in public, and they're talking about whether or not one of the characters should get hit in the balls, and Jeff Bridges says, "I don't know if getting hit in the balls is like a comedic thing that we really want to go for here, and that might be the last time someone has said no to comedy in a Marvel movie." Also, just more on like the actors and the casting process. Gwyneth Paltrow is great in this movie. I think she's a wonderful character in this, and one of the last times in these movies that she's an actual character in this movie and not just like a support for Tony Stark. She's actually her own kind of person in this and all that. However, it is hilarious watching the behind the scenes, and Gwyneth Paltrow hasn't a fucking clue what she's talking about, which, as we've seen, rings true to this very day, where we have Robert Downey Jr. and Jeff Bridges talking about how great it is, feeling like a kid again and reliving these moments when you're reading comic books and feeling like you are a superhero. And then Gwyneth Paltrow's just like, "I've heard of Spider-Man." She just hasn't a clue. This is a job. And you know what? Fair enough. Like, 10 years ago I would have been mad about that, but it's a job, and it's her job to act the way that this character is written, and she doesn't need to be a huge comic fan to get the character of Pepper Potts. One of my favorite things about the behind the scenes stuff in this movie, and one of my favorite aspects of like any movie, as evidenced by some of the other videos I've done, is the creation of the practical suits. And there's way more information than I'm going to give here, because eventually I will do a Costuming Chronicles on Iron Man whenever. I kind of wanted to talk more about the experience of the actors and stuntmen rather than talking about the specifics of the creation and concept design of these armors. And seeing how these stuntmen describing themselves as having to learn to live in these costumes and move in them naturally, because Tony Stark's going to be moving naturally in that Mark 1 suit despite it being huge and bulky. And so there's an element of working with the suit and learning to be in it. And so there's tons of also behind the scenes videos of stuntmen running around, performing some of the movements, seeing what they can do and can't do in these big monsters of suits. One thing that will always amaze and inspire me to no end is seeing a real stuntman wearing the Mark II suit and walking around in it and it moving with him and all of that. Because again, nowadays you don't get that in superhero movies and big budget movies. Even in small budget movies, you can't get that. Watching a stuntman walk around in a real Iron Man suit, I know it's not practical and there's green screen spots on the suit where they have to change a couple of things, and obviously it's not made of real metal and none of this shit in it works and all that kind of thing. But it is still inspiring and so damn cool to see a real Iron Man suit from head to toe. And it's the kind of thing that inspired like cosplayers to build real ones out of like foam and all that kind of thing and 3D print them and make them real because it was practical in the first place. And I love seeing that. It is incredible. The effort that Jon Favreau and company went, and Stan Winston and all of these people went to make sure that these things were real and tangible for the audience, I admire it to no end. That being said, it devastated me seeing them destroy a $50,000 car with a big green screen block. That's a fun little moment in the behind the scenes where all these crew members are practically crying just watching them drop a giant block on this car to simulate when Tony Stark falls through the roof into that car. Another thing that I love to see that's just inspiring and very relatable is Jon Favreau being really fucking worried about getting the movie done and how people will react to it and will it pay off or not just monetarily, like who gives a shit about the money, right? Like yes, it's important for the studio and that, but the reason why the MCU has made the money that it has is because it connected with people and it connected with the audience, and that's what Jon Favreau was concerned about, and that is what made this small movie into a huge success at the time. Seeing Jon Favreau just be like, I hope that this pays off. I hope that this insane idea of bringing an Iron Man to life will work and will connect with people. And that is so relatable as someone who's worked on films and someone who's made their own shorts, and that looking at something that you've created, whether you're proud of it or whether you see it and you go, fuck, I have ruined this, or there's no fixing it, and just praying that people see what you want them to see in it and that they see what you see in it. They see the beauty of what's been taken out of your head and placed on a page or in on the screen. The fact that like I did that on a budget of fucking nothing and it connected with at least a couple of people, the precious few that I've shown, and then seeing Jon Favreau working with $150 million and having the same concern that I did, that is truly inspiring. That is why we need these behind the scenes things. It's to inspire more young filmmakers, to show them that whether you're working with a tenner or $150 million, the concerns are all the same. Anyway, getting into the post-production, not much more to say on this in the behind the scenes. There's a ton of information, guys, but I didn't want to just repeat everything that I saw in the Blu-ray and stuff. You can go look at that if you want. It's like 3 fucking hours long. I just wanted to give it to you in, at the moment, 25-ish minutes. And just get into the creation of these movies and talk a little bit about the effort that went into these movies. And I'm sure that will fluctuate as these movies go on, but I think if this retrospective shows you anything, I think the more heart and soul and effort and care that are put into these movies in the production stage, the better the movie tends to be. There were 3 VFX companies that worked on this film, to varying degrees. The biggest and the one that did the most work was Industrial Light and Magic. We all know Industrial Light and Magic. They do basically every Disney movie. Owned by George Lucas for years. They worked on. It was founded on Star Wars and has worked on some of the greatest movies ever made throughout the years and some of the biggest movies ever made. So of course they would take on the bulk of this work, fight scenes, flight scenes, all that kind of thing. However, where more of the behind the scenes information is and where a lot more of the scrappiness of this movie is are in the smaller companies. So there was a company called the Embassy that worked on the Mark 1 sequence, so that's everything from when Tony puts on the Mark 1 to him coming out of the cave. And some shots are fairly obvious, although there are some shots that I didn't even realize were VFX, such as the kind of full reveal of the Mark II. That's partially VFX and working in post. When he does that big punch right before that, that is mocapped by Jon Favreau himself. He wanted to get into the mocap suit for just the hero shot of the Mark 1, which I think is so cool. I think if I had that budget and I was making an Iron Man movie or a superhero movie of any kind, I'd be like, put me in the suit just once. And the other, even smaller VFX company than that is called The Orphanage, and they worked just on the heads-up display. You know, that incredible, innovative idea to connect you with Tony Stark, to never lose that connection even behind a helmet, by producing the HUD and having all this like digital information swiping across the screen, something that we now associate exclusively with Iron Man. Well, for one thing, the concept of that was inspired by this shot from 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is so cool. I love seeing these classics being referenced in such small and like ways that I never made that fucking connection. I've seen that shot from 2001 a ton of times, and I've seen 2001, and I never thought that kind of looks like the Iron Man thing. Great, it is great to see something being homaged in that kind of a way. But yeah, The Orphanage worked on. It's so weird saying it without clarifying that it's a VFX company, but you guys know what I'm talking about. Unless you're just taking your afternoon shit and missed the part where I mentioned it's a VFX company. So for the heads up display, it's interesting seeing them go on for like 15 minutes about just, the information that is being presented to Tony, because there is a lot of thought and care put into it. Like when he's flying and he's looking at the horizon, and there's a horizon line on there, because of course there is. And when he's looking at various information on the HUD, things are happening. When his eyes go to a specific part of the HUD, then that part expands and it shows him like, bars like, I guess a health bar would be the closest thing that you could compare it to. And like, it's so fascinating seeing this tiny VFX company put so much thought into, well, when Tony looks at this part of the HUD, then it needs to expand and we need to see this kind of information being presented to him. And when he's doing this, we should see this kind of information being presented. That is just so cool, man. And that is all my behind the scenes information on Iron Man. Just a little bit to kind of show you just how much care was put into this movie. This is this small, scrappy movie by an independent studio that just had a fucking dream, man, and wanted to bring this comic book hero, this icon, this modern icon to life. No one gave a shit about Iron Man before 2008. There was a crappy animated show that didn't last very long in the 90s, and other than that, only like the hardcore comic fans would know about him. It's great to see them be so excited and concerned about bringing this character to life and seeing it in hours of behind the scenes information. But enough on that. How did it work? How did it pay off? Did it all amount to anything? How do I review Iron Man? Like, seriously, tell me. Because when I sat down to review it, I took like 2 pages of notes and immediately scrapped them because I went, everybody said this, right? Everybody has said everything. The MCU began with a couple of trucks in the desert blasting AC/DC. Oh my god, it's amazing that Robert Downey Jr. was the perfect casting despite him having some, legal problems in the past. Wow, like, I am Iron Man, right? What a great final line. And, oh my god, they had no script. How did they do this without a script? Everyone's talked about that. How do I say something that's different? I guess I'd start by saying this is still the best MCU movie, in my opinion. Controversial, maybe. Childhood nostalgia, whatever you care to think. But to me, this is still the best one. There are contenders. Winter Soldier is great. Guardians of the Galaxy is great. But for me, nothing will ever beat Iron Man. Despite the hundreds of hours we've got of MCU content, it'll never top Iron Man. I don't think, anyway. I mean, Iron Man's not a perfect movie. I'm going to talk about, things that aren't great about Iron Man. I just don't think any other MCU thing has reached the heights that this one has. So my experience with Iron Man, my first experience, is like any 10-year-old boy's experience with a movie like Iron Man. I thought he was the coolest guy to ever exist. You're talking, it's this rich, handsome guy with a cool beard. No, I'm not modeling this beard off Tony Stark. I just wear this because this is the best I can do, okay? But he's this cool guy with a cool beard who's handsome, he's rich, he can have any girl he wants, and then he also builds a metal superhero costume in a cave that lets him fly around and shoot fucking missiles out of his arms. Yeah, that's the coolest motherfucker on the planet, alright? A tad problematic? Probably. But when you're 10 years old, you don't give a shit. And that was the innocent feeling that I got while I was sitting down next to my girlfriend watching this. I've seen it a bunch of times. I've seen it tons of times. I've seen it probably 20 times since I first watched it back in like 2009 or 10, I reckon. I didn't catch it in the cinema, but I did watch it on DVD at home over and over again. I would sit and watch the main menu. Have you seen the main menu for Iron Man, by the way? I would watch that for 2 hours. But goddamn, when he builds the Mark 1, and then when he flies around in the Mark 2, and we get that awesome score kicking in, and then suiting up in the Mark 3, you feel on top of the world as a kid, and I got that feeling again. So, when I sat down to write this review, I thought, why? Why do I feel that still in my cold, cynical heart, who's seen way too many movies and seen the best and worst of these kinds of films? Why do I still get that feeling watching Iron Man? Nostalgia, what you're probably going to say, but I have a more interesting idea. I think the reason why we still get that feeling watching Tony Stark build the Mark 1, and why when that score kicks in and he's banging away at that metal, not just the incredible cinematography from Matthew Libatique, not just Ramin Djawadi's, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, not just his score clashing together this heavy metal music with this heroic superhero horns. I think the reason above all else is because for the first time in this film, Tony Stark has something worth fighting for, to him at least. And it's not his life. That's forfeit. He knows that's forfeit. His life is gone, lost. He shouldn't be alive, as he says in the movie. But he's fighting for Yinsen to get home to his family. And that's why we get that feeling. And that's why we want him to bust out of the cave, because he needs to get his friend, possibly the first real friend that he's ever had, out of that cave and back to his family. And then when Yinsen tragically dies, he is fighting for his memory. Because the last thing that Yinsen says to him is to not waste his life. He is carrying that sentiment with him out of the cave and out of the desert and back into the world. That is why we get that feeling. Because for the first time, Tony Stark is acting selflessly. When Tony builds and tests the Mark II suit, again, not just because of Matthew Libatique's cinematography, which is incredible, watching it pan across the costume, not just because of the set design or the production design, which is also fantastic. I love the way Tony Stark's bunker lab situation looks and the practical skeleton of the armor as he works on it. And it's not just because of that incredible score again coming in with the heroic horns even harder now, because he is making his journey to being a hero. Not just because we see that Tony Stark's only real friends are two robotic arms that he's built in his basement. You could argue that Pepper Potts is a true friend to him because he is truly honest with her, that she is the only person in the world that he cares about. But the only people I would say he considers friends at this point, not people, but the only things he would consider friends, are his own creations, Dummy and you. But above all of that, the reason why we get that feeling during the suit up of the Mark II and the flight, the first test flight, is because The Mark II represents Tony's defiance. He begins building it after Rhodey refuses to have any part in what Tony is building unless it is for the military or the Air Force. He flat out refuses to have any part in it. And so Tony goes straight home and starts working on the Mark II and building it to his words, do some good, finally. The suit up sequence, well, the kind of test flight just in the basement and following up with the suit up sequence and then following up with the proper test flight around Malibu. What a cool location, by the way. Not just like a sprawling city again, not just Metropolis or Gotham or New York, but fuck it, we'll set it in Malibu. You know, this completely different area. I love that. This scene comes right after Obadiah Stane once again tries to control Tony and tries to push him out of his company and try to put right what Tony did by shutting down the weapons division of Stark Industries. Once again, Obadiah is trying to control him, so the act of defiance is Tony suiting up in the Mark II and, to use his words again, learn to run before you can walk. And then during the flight test sequence, once again, in an act of defiance, Tony tries to break the rules of science yet again and break the record of the highest altitude achieved by any aircraft. When I was a kid, I thought he was just trying to fly to the moon, but he may as well have. So the Mark II represents the defiance, which, come on, when you're a kid, when you're a teenager, that is the coolest shit in the world, seeing somebody challenge and go against what everybody wants them to do. The Mark III, the true Iron Man suit, the red and gold, the one that we all know from those images in the comic books and from the TV show in the 90s. That is Tony's true redemption. After the first flight sequence, Pepper gives Tony what represents to him his true heart. It's the proof that Tony Stark has a heart, beginning his path to his true redemption, not just a heroic act of defiance against what his father built. And then it's after that he goes to the party where he realizes that it was all for naught, that they're still using Stark tech in Afghanistan to oppress people and to terrorize people. And so Tony realizes that he has to take his redemption by force, not being a good CEO, because sometimes that just doesn't work. Sometimes being a good company person just doesn't work because people will go behind your back and people will go over your head. No, he needs to suit up and take back his redemption. So he suits up in the Mark III, flies off to Gulmere like the badass he is, and defeats the true villain of Iron Man, himself. It's been said, but of course, the real villain of Iron Man is Tony Stark, the way he was. The terrorists at this point are just cannon fodder, right? They're some people to shoot, some people to fight, to do a cool superhero landing, and do the thing where the repulsor ray goes... Like, that's so cool, man, right? The sound design in this movie is awesome, especially in the Gulmere sequence. And of course that sequence ends with Tony Stark firing a missile from his new suit that symbolizes his redemption into his old self, a Stark weapon, and walking away from the explosion like the fucking badass he is. And so following that, we have a pretty funny, joke about something that I didn't really get that when I was 9 years old. And then that follows with Tony's admittance that he shouldn't be alive and that he's on borrowed time. And then we have 30 minutes left to fill and a villain to fight who has the exact same powers as the hero. The third act. It's been said, it's all been said, we all know those YouTube videos that have said it before. The third act is the weakest part of Iron Man, so I am not going to waste any time on it. Yes, Obadiah Stane is not the most complex villain in the world. Jeff Bridges elevates what's a pretty one-note villain. He represents, I guess, Tony's father, maybe, all the evil parts of him, or represents the worst parts of Tony himself, maybe a Tony Stark who never goes through his redemption, although we get a better example of that in Iron Man 2. So, we get Jeff Bridges doing all the lines and all the cool shit and his awesome voice and his sick-ass beard. By the way, Jeff Bridges shaved his head for this role specifically because even though he wasn't told to, he decided, well, the comic book character has a shaved head, he's bald, So yeah, fuck it, I'll shave my head. I do think though it's a cool fight with the Ironmonger. You know, the Ironmonger suit is really cool. They built the chest and the headpiece for Jeff Bridges to actually sit into and, you know, act inside in it. They only CGI'd the arms and the legs. So that's pretty cool. And, you know, I love the idea of, you know, them flying up into the air and his hubris comes back to haunt him when he doesn't figure out the icing problem because he never would have thought of it. So, yeah, that's pretty cool, right? Something that Tony Stark, you know, did in his act of defiance earlier in the movie, coming back to bite the villain that he fights. That's pretty cool. And, you know, blue laser beam shooting into the sky, and everything's good because the villain is dead. I did find myself getting more and more distracted as the third act went on. I was checking my phone a little bit, and, you know, I was with my girlfriend, so we kind of just started talking over the finale and stuff, and yeah, you know, like, I've seen the movie 100 times, come on. There's not much else to it, unfortunately. It's a cool fight, and, you know, this movie is paced perfectly. Like, I didn't even mention that, because, again, I didn't want to do just a review, but this movie, it moves so fucking fast, and so well, because it never sacrifices character moments for the speed that the movie goes at. So, yeah, you know, I had a great time. However, this film is truly rescued by its ending. You know, everybody's talked about I am Iron Man, and it is an awesome final line. I definitely think it works, and I think the reason why it worked back in the day, back in 2008, the real reason why it worked and why it became iconic, is because it was challenging norms. It was really challenging what a superhero was in cinema back in those days. There was not a superhero that had a public identity. Like, look at who were the most famous superheroes that had movies back in 2008. We had Batman, obviously, secret identity. We had Spider-Man, definite secret identity. The Hulk, more or less, right? Who else? Daredevil, you know, from 2003. He had a secret identity. All these characters have secret identities. So to have a superhero movie where the hero at the very end goes public with his identity, that shakes things up. Everybody likes to talk about how the MCU began with a couple of trucks in the desert and AC/DC, right? Everybody likes to talk about that. Wow, this is the scene that began the MCU. This is the shot that began the MCU. Can you imagine? Can you imagine if they thought in 2008 putting AC/DC over some trucks in the desert that it would end with, you know, the same hero snapping the universe out of existence with a magic glove or whatever? I don't know. Well, honestly, fuck that, right? Like, Kevin Feige had ideas about doing the Avengers. Obviously, the post-credits scene was put in there and all that kind of thing. But Jon Favreau didn't give a shit about the MCU. He didn't care about building a universe. He didn't care about, like, you know, creating a franchise even. He thought, I might be lucky to get another one. And it's actually quite funny, just a sidebar. Robert Downey Jr. keeps talking about how he might be doing this for the next 5 to 7 years, talking about how he should keep reasonably fit, because he might have to do this for the next 5 to 7 years, because that's what Hugh Jackman and Tobey Maguire were doing at the time. It's very funny in retrospect. We're nearly 20 years in, and he's still here in this universe. But Jon Favreau never cared about the Marvel Cinematic Universe. He cared about Iron Man, Tony Stark, bringing this person, this larger-than-life drawing, to the screen, and giving him a live-action face, and giving him an on-screen presence. There was no MCU Cinematic Universe plan. Just Jon Favreau and a dream to bring Iron Man to life. As a 10-year-old, this movie inspired me to go out into my parents' shed and, you know, hammer together a bunch of random shit and try to build an Iron Man suit out of, like, paper and cardboard. And as a 23, soon to be 24-year-old young filmmaker, this film continues to inspire me in so many different ways. All because Jon Favreau and company built this film in a rundown young studio with a box of scraps. And so, on a $140 million budget, Iron Man made, globally, over $585 million at the box office. Marvel's biggest gamble had paid off. And that is kind of insane that it paid off, considering this movie came out in 2008 in May. And that same summer, later that same summer, The Dark Knight would release and Indiana Jones 4 would release. And you can even see it in the behind the scenes material, Jon Favreau getting giddy at the idea that his small movie about a superhero that nobody cared about was actually being talked about in the same breath as the sequel to Batman Begins and the long awaited sequel to Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. That is kind of insane. So guys, that was my Kinospective, retrospective, whatever, on Iron Man. I really hope you enjoyed this one, guys. A lot of work has gone into it, and I cannot wait to come back to you with the Incredible Hulk. I'm not going to be doing this every single week or every 2 weeks. I'm not going to jump headfirst into being like an exclusively MCU channel. My next video is going to be about Supergirl, and I'm super excited to get that one out to you as well. But I will be back soon with a Kinospective on the Incredible Hulk, and we'll get to the end of Phase 1, and then we'll see how we go from there. So, please guys, if you liked this video at all, give it a like, subscribe for more videos like this one, and for more from the MCU Kinospective, and comment below how have your thoughts on Iron Man evolved since 2008, or since whenever the last time you saw it. Tell me what you think. How has this movie aged? Has it aged well? Has it aged kind of badly now in nearly 20 years? Let me know down below. And as always, have a great day, guys. I'll see you at the movies.